Abubakar Nur Khalil is the CEO at Recursive Capital, a board member of Jack Dorsey and Jay-Z's B Trust, and the co-founder at Qala, an organization designed to help educate the next generation of Bitcoin engineers in Africa. In our conversation, we covered everything. We got into investing in Lightning companies, building in Nigeria and Africa more broadly. We discussed this 500 Bitcoin trust set up by Jack and Jay-Z and how this money is going to be spent most effectively. And we also discussed Abubakar's role in education and helping this next generation of African engineers succeed and build on Bitcoin. Just a quick shout out before we get into the episode. Today's episode is sponsored by Voltage. Voltage is the premier provider of Bitcoin and Lightning node infrastructure. We will have more from Voltage later in the show in the Lightning round, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Abubakar, nice to meet you. I'm really excited to chat with you about all the things you're working on in Bitcoin right now. Before we get into it though, why don't we start with how you first learned about Bitcoin and how you first learned about the Lightning Network?
Nice. So it's one of those things that started really, kind of at the same time that a lot of other people did start. I guess 2017 had probably one of the largest onboardings, I guess, from just learning about people's history and how they got into the space. So mine is also similar. But just to give kind of more of a background before that, in 2013, my older brother came back with this YouTube video that was trying to explain what Bitcoin was. And at the time, I was like 14. So really, I don't understand what the video is talking about. What I got from it was that it was like a contest where you win some digital currency, whatever that meant. So that was kind of the first time I had an entry into Bitcoin. And really, after that, learning to think about it, 2015, I started watching Mr. Robot, which was kind of the first time I saw hacking demystified, so to speak. And then that kind of got me interested in the whole privacy, hacking, computers, all of that. So I was still brewing within my, I guess, subconscious. And then in 2017 was when I fully got into Bitcoin. So came up again, and then I started learning more about Bitcoin, reading up articles. Initially, obviously, I didn't understand anything I was reading, SHA-256, all of that, because I had no background in computing or anything like that. So a lot of technical things were just going over my head. So around that time was after I graduated from high school. So that was around 2017. Graduated in 2016. So the plan on my end was to go into college and actually become an architect, which, thank God I didn't go through with that. So I decided I might as well, explore this computing scene since I'm going to be reading a lot of this material. I don't understand it. So it makes sense to just go over, the basics and then walk my way through so I understand what I'm reading. So yeah, I started learning basics about programming. I taught myself how to code, basics, how a program works, compilers, all that kind of stuff. So then towards the tail end was when I started at least understanding some of the basics, like what is a hash function and all that kind of stuff. And then 2018 was when I started really programming in Python and then I think JavaScript as well. So in Python, I did a few, pet projects, like I built a programming language, all that kind of stuff to get a sense of what's really going on under the metal, so to speak. And then I did a few other projects using Electron.js with JavaScript, a little bit of C and C++, but not too much. And then in 2019 was when I started focusing more on the protocol level of Bitcoin. So I started reading up more about how Bitcoin Core works, started reading the Bitcoin wikis and all that kind of stuff. And then October that year was when, I saw a pull request by Takimbo, which was the first time I saw, pull requests coming out of Nigeria, and I was really, really impressed, and that kind of inspired my going ahead to take a shot at a pull request. So before that, I hadn't compiled Bitcoin Core at all. I just knew about the repo, been checking it out. So in October, they usually have, open source projects in general. They usually have like a Hacktober Fest. So they have good first issues for beginners, and then they introduce you into the, I guess, the repos, and then you have these minor good first issues I work on. So I picked up one of them. And then that was my first entree, I guess, into the ecosystem. And that was the first time I saw the reality of how the ecosystem is within the dev ecosystem specifically. So that's the first time I was like, these guys aren't toxic. They aren't like the Bitcoin crowd. So they're really, really welcoming. I mean, a lot of the questions I was asking that, in hindsight were kind of stupid, but they still managed to walk me through it. So I met a lot of the developers there, I guess people like Habasto, the Stack, all these other people, and Vladimir, who's the lead maintainer of the project. So it was really interesting going through kind of that whole experience. I learned a lot, compiling Bitcoin Core, some of how the pull requests, the flow works, so how code is reviewed, um, squashing commits, all that kind of stuff. So it really helped with my entire understanding of how the repo works, all the way from opening a pull request to it getting merged. That was the first time I contributed to Core, and then it got merged in 2020, I think early 2020. So yeah, after that, just to give kind of some more background with regards to how Recursive started, in 2018, we're having conversations with my older brother again about, starting a fund. And he was like, you know what, might as well do this. We can't wait for foreign capital to come in and fund these projects. And there's already capital here in Africa, so we might as well pool these funds and then invest into startups in these in the ecosystem. So I was like, yeah, makes a lot of sense. That kind of died out, and then 2019 started talking more about it, and then 2020 was when we officially launched Recursive in February. So that was also interesting from the perspective of seeing the ecosystem, kind of mapping it out from the perspective of an investor rather than a developer. So that was really intriguing as well. And then around that time, 2020, I think, or 2019 was when I started talking to other people in the ecosystem, like Bernard, for example, which was in hindsight really, really great because I got to really see how the startup space is, specifically with Bitcoin companies. And then 2022 was the time that I got into chain code. So the chain code study groups for Lightning and Bitcoin. So to answer your question with regards to Lightning, I knew about Lightning in around 2019, but it was kind of high level, just payment channels, how all of that works on the high level. So I didn't know anything about HTLCs and all of that until I did the chain code study groups, which was huge and quite a lot of fun. It was really tasking, but that's how chain code is, and that's really the best way to get devs to really understand some of these materials, especially Lightning. I mean, if you have your first pass into Lightning, you might not understand it. It takes quite a while for a lot of it to sink in. So that was really incredible, especially getting to see some of the developers that are actually working in the space. So, individuals what do you call it? Some of the individuals that work in Lightning Labs, for example, and some individuals that ended
Yeah.
up working in Lightning Labs, like El Mutin, for example. So yeah, it was really cool to kind of get a feel of those that are actually in the space. Same thing for Bitcoin, the Bitcoin study group as well, which I met some people like, John Attack and some of the other developers that actually work either in companies in Bitcoin space or actually work contributing to core. So that was interesting as well. And then, towards the tail end of 2020 was when we started talking more, with Bernard about how to really fix up the ecosystem. Because from the perspective of Recursive, one of the challenges we initially had was the ecosystem was really, really not developed to a stage where, at least to a point where we thought it was. Because we get a lot of hype, so to speak, on Twitter about how the ecosystem is maturing and all of that. But at the time, there wasn't really anything going on. Really, there are very few Bitcoin companies. A lot of what was happening in the space is really in the wider crypto space, which is what would I say, what is now known as Web3, I guess, which is basically Ethereum, Bitcoin projects, and all of that. So that was kind of how the conversations were going. So we decided to formalize some pathway for individuals to go in from developers in the space all the way to becoming Bitcoin developers and Lightning developers too. So that's kind of how Qala came to be. So in 2021 was when we launched Qala. And then, with regards to Recursive as well, when we started, we had this idea of trying to coin all the innovations that's happening in the space. So we thought Web3 was a good way to term it. And then obviously there's a reason why we had to rebrand was because, at the end of the day, we figured out that the term Web3 became co-opted by the Ethereum gang. So what ended up happening was we're getting some influx of crypto projects, so things that are outside of Bitcoin, which are like, this is probably because of how we're wording our thesis. So we had to rebrand. We did the rebrand in 2021. And then the focus was just to streamline it to make it clear that all the innovation we're talking about and the projects, companies and everything are specifically in the Bitcoin space. So we're talking about companies that have to do with financial sovereignty, which we believe Bitcoin is the prime example of how to get financially sovereign, I guess, as an individual. Another thing is with regards to the privacy angle, so encryption as a right, all that kind of online sovereignty, so to speak. So all of that is within the context of Bitcoin. So that's kind of what the operating thesis is now for Recursive Capital. So that's kind of the how would I say, how I got into the space, where is that? And then with Trust, the application was open. My older brother sent it to me on Twitter, and he was like, you might as well try this. And I was like, there are a lot of OGs in the space already, and I'm seeing a lot of the mentions. So who am I to think I could get in? So yeah, we spoke a bit. Mine's convinced me. I was like, worst case scenario, you don't get it. I mean, what's the big deal then? And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So I applied. It took quite a while for them to get back to us, which now we know why, because 7,000 plus people applied, so it makes sense. So they got
Yeah.
back to us, and I was like, at the time, I even thought, I didn't get in, hence why I didn't get any reply. But I was really excited about getting the reply, and then from then on, it was stage by stage. So it was mostly getting a feel of what our perspective is with regards to the space, so challenges, um, what are the solutions to those challenges? Because obviously it's easy to point out challenges, but solutions are a lot more difficult to come up with. So we did all of that, going through writing, all of that, all the way to video interviews and streams. So it was really a fascinating experience. I learned quite a lot during that time because it gave me a chance to actually reflect and go, hey, Abubakar, calm down. You want to contribute to the space, say there are all these problems. How do we go about fixing it? So it was really, really like an eye-opening experience for me when it comes to, sitting down and kind of mapping out what the context that we're at or that we're in, and then seeing how we could actually bridge those gaps and get to a stage where we want to be in terms of Bitcoin, growing the Bitcoin ecosystem. So yeah, that's kind of how the entire thing went through. So how I got into the space, the state of all the projects and everything.
Right. That's an amazing story. And, just to recap here, you've gone through Chain Code, you are a Bitcoin Core contributor, Qala co-founder, Trust board member, CEO at Recursive, all very focused on Bitcoin. And like right from the get-go, it seemed like Bitcoin was your calling here. What motivates you to get up every morning and specifically build on Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the thing with Bitcoin is we have to look at it holistically, really, because there are a lot of projects in the space, like you mentioned. And over the years, it might interest a few folks to know that initially I was quite open to Ethereum when I was going into space like 2017, 18, to a point where I actually thought it was at least a viable competitor to Bitcoin. But then later on, I realized the amount of complexity on that type of system will only keep increasing, especially with going to switching from proof of work to proof of stake, because they're essentially trying to reinvent the wheel. So there's that. So a lot of what happened over time was me understanding some of the unique properties of Bitcoin, so to speak. So things like, censorship resistance. There isn't any other project that has that type of capability. So we're talking about right now, I guess what you'd be saying is having it as being a superior monetary system, really, and monetary network from perspective of allowing global, cheap, instant payments, via the Lightning Network, for example, and even on-chain Bitcoin as well. It allows you to have a system that doesn't discriminate, number one, because that's a huge issue with the current system with, Swift and corresponding banking. So if you're someone in Nigeria, which we do have some of these challenges, if you're trying to pay for online services, and even just generally using fiat payment rails, there are a lot of restrictions with regards to either how much money you're allowed to spend, which ironically is supposed to be your money, but people have to understand that once you get involved with banks, it's no longer your money, which is something that Bitcoin helps shed light on. Before Bitcoin, I didn't really know how a lot of these things work, but that's another reason. And another thing is with regards to the general idea of freedom. So if you think about it, the moment we see any sort of clamping down on whether it's human rights or individual rights, either as a country or nation states, what we tend to see is people moving towards adopting Bitcoin. And that's not a coincidence, really. I don't see it as a coincidence. I see it as a direct result of the fact that Bitcoin is freedom money. So the moment you have some of these crises around the world, whether it's for, whether it's protests or you're having authoritative regimes or you're having any sort of infringement on rights, you tend to see people flock to Bitcoin. And it's not the same for any other project. And like I said, that's the result of it uniquely being, a monetary network, an asset that allows you to really become self-sovereign from that perspective. So I think just to cut it up, into a single answer, it'd definitely be because Bitcoin is freedom money. And again, if you're allowing individuals to have this sort of freedom, it removes some of the constraints that they see. So even from the perspective of like financial sovereignty, or we're talking about financial inclusion, especially with individuals that don't have bank accounts, not because they can't get one, but because there are a lot of challenges with opening a bank account and maintaining it. Again, with some of the service charges that people experience with bank accounts, the same isn't applied for Bitcoin. For example, there's no service charge and all those kind of things. You actually own your money. No one can spend your money on your behalf. Another thing, obviously, is with regards to how cheap it is for you to actually spend those Bitcoins. So, with a lot of these other projects, especially Ethereum, that likes to be touted as, Bitcoin's competitor, you see a lot of the issues around individuals not being able to actually use this monetary network from perspective of individuals that are not, super rich or uber rich. So these are average folks that are just trying to send money back and forth, either for remittance or even local commerce. So Bitcoin solves a lot of that. It streamlines that entire flow from perspective, allowing you to have access to a global monetary network that's cheap, fast, and instant, especially with integration of the Light network. If you think about it, fine, all the way in some other country outside of Africa, like let's say Chicago or Hong Kong, for example. Number one, I won't face any restrictions with regards to sending money back home. What I end up sending is a large chunk of the actual money, especially through the Lightning Network. So if I was going to send, $100, for example, I could do that instantly via the Lightning Network. If I was going to send 100,000, I'll do that instantly via the Lightning Network. Another thing is people like to say, oh, you could send large amounts to via regular fiat monetary networks. But the thing is, you can't do that cheaply and instantly. It's impossible. And you could only do that via Bitcoin. So a lot of these benefits that we have that range the entire, or should I say, span the entire monetary context, so to speak, is it's only possible to do with Bitcoin. All their projects fail at some point, whether we're talking about censorship resistance, instant settlements, or cheap instant settlements. A lot of that combination of value that we see in Bitcoin, a lot of the projects simply do not have that. So again, that's the main reason why I feel it's very, very important for us to not only build on Bitcoin, but to really grow the ecosystem. So education, pushing it out to people, because again, those who are supposed to benefit from all these values are average folks, and they can't benefit from it if they don't know about it. So a lot of my work doing on the ground, education with regards to teaching people about Bitcoin, how to secure their coins, how to use Bitcoin correctly, not doxing themselves or what do you call it, address reusing and all of that. And another important part is, work with Qala, for example, with actually training the developers to build some of these tools, services, and projects that have the African context in mind. So yeah, really,
Mhm.
that's the main reason why every day, I'm lucky. I would consider myself to be able to work in the space and actually be this closely involved, either from the perspective of an investor or a developer or just an average Bitcoin user. So, that's the main reason
That's
why
a
I'm
great
working on it.
answer. I really enjoyed it. That's a great perspective. I love that. Um, I want to get into your background in Africa. You lived in Nigeria your whole life. I want to understand what payments were like for you growing up, and how they've evolved over time. So, did you have any experiences with a bank? Was it common for people to use banks growing up? How have banks now taken on a smaller role as Bitcoin has emerged and evolved, or is it still quite common for people to use banks? I'd love to hear your perspective in Nigeria, and how, I guess, payments have evolved over the last 20 years.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, for the last 20 years, that's I would have been about two. But to give my perspective of the general space, really, the monetary network space, I guess. I don't see, banks or the traditional system being relegated to like a minor role. I think what you're going to have is probably more integration between the two. That's Bitcoin and the traditional financial system. Again, because of some of these existing structures that are already present. So governments are still going to be around. So therefore, by extension, you're still going to have fiat, for example, whether it's for taxes or just using it as regular, for regular commerce and for surveillance purposes in the case of some nation states. So with regards to how payments have been working, I guess, obviously the majority prior to Bitcoin has been traditional bank accounts. So all the way from we're talking about checks all the way to when the ATMs came in, and then using that, and then having a lot more mobile, specifically smartphone proliferation around the continent, and then moving to mobile money, kind of like the digital side of things with regards to sending money back and forth. So a lot of bank account apps that he used. And then with that, we saw some of the initial startups in the space that are with regards to fintech in general. So all of that kind of spread out within, I'd say, the early 2010s. So when you had a lot of these applications come in and some of these projects like Flutterwave on some of these payment gateways, so that are trying to properly streamline the digital experience with regards to banks, for example. So a lot of that has been in play. In other African countries, it's mobile money that takes the precedent, as opposed to some of the using direct financial apps that are not utilizing mobile money or USSD codes, for example. So all of that has been happening. But then when Bitcoin came in, obviously, the initial intro was as a speculative asset, which is understandable given some people are trying to evade, or not evade really, to kind of battle against the existing inflation for their currencies and all of that and trying to move to some sort of secure asset or trying to grow their wealth. So it makes a lot of sense why that was kind of the appealing value proposition that came in. So over time, what we now saw was, people starting to realize, hey, this Bitcoin isn't just, number go up technology. There's actually more to it, like I mentioned, with regards to censorship, having like cheap borderless payments and all of that. So what we now saw was a spring up of companies trying to take advantage of that. So initially, obviously, it's exchanges and all of that, because again, it was the speculative reason that was the prominent thing that was taking precedent in the space, I guess, or priority. And then over time, we kind of saw it kind of explore other avenues of gaining access to Bitcoin. So gift cards, for example, and all that kind of stuff. And then after that, we kind of see more services and products that allow you to either send, let's say, Bitcoin to a specific address, and then on the other end, it's a bank transfer that's done on your behalf. So companies like Payor's Coin Profile, for example, in Nigeria. Another thing is we started seeing some of these wallets come up to take advantage of alternative ways to actually get access to Bitcoin or take advantage of the asset itself. So we saw applications like BitNut that Recursive invested in. So things like dollar cost averaging, even loans, for example, using Bitcoin. So some of that financial innovation in the Bitcoin context was starting to prop up, I guess, around the space that was, outside of just buying and selling. So we're currently experiencing a lot more companies focus into exploring some of the products and services like loans, dollar cost averaging on top of Bitcoin. And then again, we're now seeing more focus, or at least more interest in the Lightning Network, which hasn't been a prominent feature in the continent, sorry. And that's thanks to, companies like BitNut that are constantly innovating. So we're currently having wallets recognize that, the next logical step for you when it comes to Bitcoin adoption or integration is to move to the Lightning Network. So what we're going to be seeing is a lot more companies trying to either integrate Bitcoin, whether it's the regular Bitcoin on chain, or moving more towards the Lightning side. Because at the end of the day, we have companies like Bitcoin again who are really trying to build out the space from an infrastructure perspective. So getting APIs, nodes running. So that'll kind of make the entire adoption across the space a lot easier. So people can hop onto the APIs and get Lightning integration instantly. And the benefit of that is now you have essentially a supercharged version of the Bitcoin network, where you have instant cheap settlements globally and even locally. So you're going to see a lot more people recognize that benefit and build out towards integrating some of those use cases and some of the advantages that come with having the Lightning integrated. And then with regards to generally using money, it's still traditional bank accounts. And like I said, that's kind of because of the UX situation with regards to Bitcoin and use of Lightning. I mean, to begin with, there aren't too many Bitcoin only wallets, for example. Another thing is some of
Right.
the wallets that have Bitcoin integrated have a lot of other shitcoins, or they have the apps have their own tokens, which makes the entire UX horrible because some of them require you to have either these tokens, and then some of them charge absurd amounts of fees. They don't allow the users to actually select their fees based on what's going on in the mempool, for example. So yeah, we're going to see a lot more integration between the two. And we're going to see a lot more focus on the Lightning Network and a lot more innovation around Bitcoin in general, specifically with loans, whether you're seeing ethical loans or just traditional loans, you're going to see a lot of that. A lot more focus on dollar cost averaging and some of these other avenues, because again, our hope or our goal is to ensure that all the noise that's going around in the space is curbed by the fact that Bitcoin is the single source of signal. Because once you have that, then you know you're going to have a lot more developers that are focused long term, which is what we want. I mean, there is also a
Mhm.
moral angle, so to speak, with regards to picking out the best payment solution, or should I say payment network, that you want to build out for the entire for the long term, really, when it comes to the African context. So we're thinking about it from the perspective of, hey, what's the best monetary network to be building on long term to actually get some of these individuals either out of poverty or get them to actually have some semblance of dignity when it comes to being financially sovereign. So from my perspective, I believe it makes a lot of sense to bank on the solution that seems to have the long-term promise, which is Bitcoin at the end of the day. I mean, we've seen so many
Yeah.
projects come in and go. And a lot of these other projects are just basically companies coming to Africa to take advantage of either the talent or, the financial circumstance that these people are having. So doing like 1,000 airdrops of some random shitcoin that has such a small market cap that you can't even exit if you become, rich in that sense in the scene. So definitely is to have individuals recognize that the long-term promise lies with Bitcoin and to ensure that all that building is going around there on top of Bitcoin. Because at the end of the day, if we're building for a resilient alternative that's supposed to be here for like the next 50, 100 years, it definitely has to be built on a resilient network like Bitcoin. So that's definitely how things are going and kind of what we
Mhm.
aim to achieve with regards to long-term building of Bitcoin.
What do you think Bitcoin's role will be? You talked about in specifically tying together like, or improving the way that banks work. You talked about loans. You talked about DCA. Um, you know, how do you view Bitcoin's role for helping people who are already in the banking system versus those who are unbanked today? Where do you think it has a bigger impact, specifically in Nigeria?
That's a good question. It'd be hard to give like an immediate answer to that, but let me explore both, I guess. That would probably help
Sure.
simplify the answer. So, with regards to those that are currently banked, I think it's very, very fairly obvious to them that, having a bank account has quite a lot of baggage to it. Whether you're talking about, charges that are done to the account on, things like some random stuff like stamp duties or card service fees, all these kind of charges that are just charged to the accounts, which isn't ideal, especially for people who don't have quite a lot in their account to begin with. So these are individuals that are average folks, I mean. So it really, really has a huge impact with regards to them storing their value or maintaining their value over time. And another thing, obviously, is with regards to inflation, which is the primary thing. And that's kind of the main reason why I would argue that the E-Naira flopped. Obviously, there are other reasons with regards to how they chose to deploy that to begin with. But yeah, a lot of it is people obviously do recognize the fact that simply having a digital rebrand is not enough to actually get rid of the inflation issue that we're having in the country. So there's that. And another thing is with regards to freedom and censorship. So it's common knowledge, especially in parts of around the world that face, quite high levels of corruption. You tend to have the government or nation state clamp down on individuals trying to either express themselves or just innocent bystanders, really. So this comes with blanket blanket circulars or bans done either by the CBN or some sort of regulatory body, and this tends to affect the average individuals because these are usually blanket decisions that are made, so they have wide ranging effects on the ground. Really, when you think about it from a perspective of either having some accounts banned or some restrictions with regards to spending your actual money that's stored in the bank account. So a lot of people definitely recognize that as not being something they want long term, especially if they're looking to either maintain their wealth or actually grow their wealth. So from that perspective, a lot of them will start to see that Bitcoin is the only viable alternative, both from trying to beat out inflation or actually trying to grow out your wealth or trying to actually use it for day to day again, because there is a lot of inefficiencies with regards to using traditional fiat rails that we have currently. And another interesting thing is we're going to be seeing a lot more mobile money. At least that's based on stuff we're hearing from, what do you call it? Payment provider. No, sorry. Network operators like MTN that's operating in Nigeria. So after they did this rebrand recently, Another thing that they were talking about was, besides getting 5G rolled out, which would help a lot in terms of some of the internet infrastructure that we have, because we're still stuck in 4G, while the rest of the world's already at 5G. So with regards to mobile money, they already have a principle, what do you call it? Sort of an agreement in principle with regards to the regulators, but they still don't have the license, so to speak, to engage in mobile money. So again, this will help fast track some of the onboarding process, as we've seen with other African countries that allow mobile money, for example. So seeing these network providers go that route would help, obviously, with regards to adoption in general. And that again will sort of dovetail into adoption with regards to Bitcoin, because again, we're going to be seeing a lot of these individuals that have, whether it's feature phones or smartphones, get onboarded through mobile money. And then they can also use Bitcoin actually via mobile money. So there are individuals that are working on whether it's using Bitcoin to buy and sell using USSD codes, for example, and even some apps that try to leverage automated USSD codes. So there's a lot of promise with regards to having those who are currently banked to actually use Bitcoin or recognize the benefits of Bitcoin and to use it seamlessly, since that's the major challenge from an adoption perspective. And then for those that are unbanked, if you think about it, if their first experience with regards to having some sort of formal financial account or system that they could use to be spending, buying, selling, storing loans, all of that. If that is Bitcoin, obviously the benefit to that is immediately they're having to skip all the inefficiencies we've spoken about with regards to having traditional bank accounts. Because the truth is, there are a lot of reasons why people don't have bank accounts, even outside of the fact that, high costs of having these bank accounts. And the thing is, some of these individuals either don't have access to some of these financial services close by because, again, some of them rely on brick and mortars to actually even get it started. And with regards to Bitcoin, you don't need any of that. I mean, you could erect up, Go tenors, you could use mesh networking to get rural areas uplinked to Bitcoin. You could also use block streams and satellite receivers as well. So there is a larger um, there's a larger avenue, so to speak, with regards to onboarding people onto Bitcoin. So it's going to be a lot easier for these individuals to not only have these censorship resistant bank accounts that are free, global, that do not discriminate based on their financial system, financial circumstance, which if it's the traditional banking system, that is something that obviously would affect them, especially when it comes to some of the even documentation that has to do with actually opening up an account. All of that isn't within the Bitcoin context. Bitcoin doesn't care about, your age, your gender, your nationality, your geography, all of it is super irrelevant. All you need is just open up, get a wallet that can generate, a seed. Really, all you need is to get that initial passphrase, and then you essentially have this superior monetary network that you can access anytime, cheaply, freely from any part of the world. So that's kind of how I see both. Obviously, I think probably the latter. So having those unbanked has a larger promise from the perspective of the sheer size of those that are actually unbanked on the continent being larger than those that are banked. So obviously the promise is greater from that perspective in terms of getting these people on a superior monetary network, like I said, which would really help them both from the perspective of commerce, average day-to-day use, but even from the perspective of maintaining financial sovereignty, which is a huge, huge issue globally, really, even
Hmm.
outside of Africa. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it too. And I guess I would sum up the answer definitely.
Yeah. And I guess for the people who are unbanked, this is almost an opportunity to leapfrog banks and just to
Yep.
go entirely to the next level before even accessing it. We saw certain regions in the developing world would leapfrog like telephone poles, and they got
Yeah.
straight to internet. They got, forget the landlines, forget the telephone poles, just give me internet, give me a phone, a cell phone. And so maybe that's the same situation with Bitcoin.
Yep.
I want to talk specifically about inflation, though, in Nigeria, because I was digging into it a little bit. Nigeria has, for most of the last decade, has seen double-digit inflation. How much of that do you think weighs into Bitcoin's value prop in Nigeria today? Like, is that something that people are really aware of and are using Bitcoin to avoid? Or is that just kind of like a secondary effect and maybe like a second or third reason that they might want to try Bitcoin?
Yeah. So, like I said, initially, with regards to individuals trying to beat out inflation or at least protect against it, obviously the initial routes were some of the traditional alternatives like maybe T-bills, in some cases actually physically buying assets, whether it's real estate or livestock or some of these other, traditional methods. But over time, a lot more people via some of these applications that already exist that show you that the primary use cases you could actually use Bitcoin as a savings mechanism. A lot of that started taking up, some of the mind share that we see with regards to people trying to beat out some of this inflation and some of the issues that come with inflation with regards to the purchasing power and everything. So yeah, definitely we're seeing a lot more people be more open to using Bitcoin as an alternative savings mechanism, definitely, especially from a perspective of Bitcoin being the best performing asset long term in the last decade. So that's a huge track record that isn't common around the ecosystem, definitely with regards to other cryptos. So another thing is a lot more people obviously are seeing the promise with stablecoins as well, specifically because some of these individuals aren't those that are, long-term bullish Bitcoiners. So they aren't going to be hodling, diamond hands all the way for like 10 years. But for those that are doing it, good on them. So for those that aren't, their view is, short-term Bitcoin isn't really that great to be holding, even though, relatively speaking, we're still in a bull market if you look at the chart outside of, a few months. So yeah, their perspective is Bitcoin isn't too great short-term. So we might as well go into some of these stablecoins like Tether. Now, the issue with that is a lot of people are starting to see some of the true unique value propositions of Bitcoin, like I mentioned, which is actually being able to use this monetary network cheaply, which is a huge thing, especially for average folks. So some of the challenges that they're seeing is, okay, we're going the stablecoin route, right? But at the same time, if I want to spend some of these stable coins or actually get access to these stable coins is insanely expensive, especially with regards to compounding swap fees on top of gas fees. It's really absurd. So a lot of them are stuck between having some portion in stable coins and then some long-term holdings in Bitcoin. Now, for me, as a Bitcoiner, I go, how can we bridge the gap between these two? And talking with others in the space, obviously the logical next step for us is, in the ecosystem is to actually get stable coins on the Lightning Network, specifically on the Lightning Network, because again, you're providing cheap, instant global settlements on top of this network, and it's also decentralized as well, censorship resistant again because it is Bitcoin. So if you kind of think of it from the perspective of if they both have this savings mechanism and at the same time have this stable mechanism that they could be holding short term, you do allow them the ability to stay within the Bitcoin ecosystem, which is maintaining all those benefits that we spoke about, like censorship resistance and all of that. So from that perspective, that is what we feel would be the next long-term next step, I guess, which is to have those stablecoins on Lightning. But outside of that, definitely the current situation is some hold long-term Bitcoin, some even still hold short-term Bitcoin because of the what I say philosophical long-term belief that they have that Bitcoin will still continue to outpace all these other assets long-term and actually preserve their wealth and grow it. And then obviously there's still individuals that are stuck in the limbo of still having to put up with stable coins even though they aren't that easy to use or cheap to use to begin with. So that's kind of what we're seeing on the ground and how we think we could help fix some of the issues we see with people going towards the stablecoin route.
That's really interesting. I want to switch gears a little bit to talk about the B Trust.
Okay.
You alluded to it in the beginning of our conversation.
Yeah.
For those who aren't familiar, there were over 7,000 applicants to be a board member for this B Trust, and it's 500 Bitcoin trust set up by Jack Dorsey and Jay-Z to focus on investing in both Africa and India. And so in setting up the B Trust, I was kind of looking through the Twitter profile, and there were seven high-level goals that you guys outlined. I think there's 4 board members, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So 7,000 down to 4. You were one of the 4, and now you've got these 7 goals. I'll just read them off here. First one is to design Genesis principles. Next is to implement those principles. Next is to form an entity in a jurisdiction. Next is to take Bitcoin custody, then hire a lead. form a communication plan, and share setup cost funding. Can you talk me through that process, how you came up with that process first, and where you guys are in that process of setting up the B Trust?
Yeah, definitely. So just to kind of give people some clarification with regards to the jurisdiction we're looking at least going into initially is definitely going to be primarily Africa. But then we will be growing out into other spaces like in the global south, such as India, like we mentioned, with the starting of the announcement itself. Now, with regards to the general operation and how we see, our role and some of the some of the main goals and priorities that we have. The primary thing that we want to prioritize definitely is transparency and community engagement. And the main reason for that is we see, first and foremost, there aren't many initiatives like this to begin with. So we're uniquely positioned from, at least that's how we're seeing it from our perspective, to kind of set the standard or like set the pace with regards to how these things should be done in the future. Say, let's say someone wants to replicate this across the continent or even within the context of a country itself. So the primary thing, obviously, is to prioritize trying to be as transparent as possible with the community with regards to what we're thinking of, where we're at, and what the long-term goal is. Hence, the communication via Twitter, and we'll be building out other channels, but initially it'll be via Twitter. So one of the things, definitely, like you mentioned, is those seven priorities that we have. So that spans all the way from erecting the entity because initially when we started they were very very open. That's Jack and the hiring team, that once you get picked onto the board, everything is going to be up to you guys to figure out. So set out everything from scratch all the way to actually investing will be um, solely in your hands. So obviously going through that I was like, let's see what happens. And then obviously getting on the board, I was like, oh shit, like it's definitely all up to us. So a lot of that has been really, really interesting from a perspective of looking at some of these challenges that we're facing, or should I say goals that we're trying to reach with regards to custody, jurisdiction, and setting up in general. We are uniquely positioned to, like I said, pan out or map out some of how we think these things should be done and set up from the perspective of ensuring first and foremost that there isn't any self-dealing because we expect initiatives like that to have individuals with nefarious ideas or perspectives long term. And then obviously another thing is to ensure that we're providing a structure that is long term so that can weather the storm throughout, the duration of its entire existence, which obviously from our perspective, like I mentioned, being on Bitcoin or in Bitcoin, the priority is always to ensure that you're making structures, the entities or projects or just your general contributions in the space to be long-term viable. Because at the end of the day, if they're not, then really we're just the same as shitcoiners, I guess, from that perspective. So again, with regards to where we're at currently, so we're still obviously in the initial setup stage because all these things take time, especially with jurisdiction and custody, especially jurisdiction, because a lot of things are changing, and you have to be very very careful with regards to the jurisdiction that you land on. And a lot of these things are really just trade-offs. So it has to do with trying to balance out quite a lot of things, especially with custody as well, because you don't want to have a situation where now that we've publicly announced four board members, you don't want to have to risk their actual their security on the ground in some of these parts, especially like Nigeria for Drama or South Africa for Qala. So obviously, is to prioritize safety of the board members themselves, also to prioritize ensuring that the interest of the board, sorry, the interest of the fund itself, sorry, the trust itself, is maintained long term. So whatever the makeup of the board is, you want to make sure that the founding genesis principles are still intact, they're still being adhered to. The general goal of the trust itself of investing specifically into, towards Bitcoin only, and having the idea of okay, what happens if there's a Bitcoin fork, for example. So these are things that obviously we're thinking about and ensuring that we have it set in stone, at least to some extent, because obviously there are some things that are down to implementation of the board members or the lead itself. So yeah, we'll be communicating a lot more with the public. We'll be obviously announcing very soon a few other things with regards to where we're currently at and the progress we've made so far and the next steps again. So yeah, that's really kind of how we're looking at it. And it's really it's exciting, I guess, from the perspective, like I said, we're trying to map out viable structures long term. So yeah, there's a lot to still be done, especially actually deploying the funds themselves and getting the lead. But yeah, we're really
That's
making
really
a lot of progress, definitely. So yeah, we'll be communicating more via our Twitter.
very cool. I'd love to get some insight on the backstory of this trust and how it developed, because I
Yeah.
know Jack's been doing a lot of work with in Africa and specifically with payments, and yeah, obviously he's been a big proponent of Bitcoin for a long time. Do you have any insight into like how Jack and Jay-Z decided this was that they should first do this, and that second, this trust format was the right way to do it? Would love to hear any backstory insight you have there.
Yeah. So I can't give obviously an exact reason why, but I could obviously infer based on what I know about, the two and the conversations we've had with both of them as well, especially with Jack, is primarily with regards to why Bitcoin. I think is very plainly obvious that they do see the value, like I said, long term being in Bitcoin. And another thing is obviously if you want to have individuals have access to this global monetary network that's superior, you do need some apps, products, and services that are built to simplify access or actually innovate around the network itself. So it makes a lot of sense to capitalize on the existing, first of all, youthful population on the continent, both Africa and India, and also the dev talent that's coming out of both of these geographies, which is tremendous, obviously. I mean, we see that currently in the regular fintech space and tech in general. When you go to either Fortune 500 companies or even some of these tech companies, you see a lot of the makeup being from these two geographies. So it makes a lot of sense to have this sort of initiative target and tap into that existing talent pool. So yeah, from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense why they would choose Bitcoin to begin with and why those two geographies. And another thing is with regards to the structure, we have to remember if you're trying to create these long-term entities, right? You need to ensure that you're prioritizing, again, like I said, transparency with regards to the operation of these funds. Because if you think about it, there has been a lot of aid, so to speak, or like money coming in to help develop Africa. And then a lot of what happens is these funds are either diverted into private individuals' accounts or they're either squandered or taken in and then cutbacks and sorry, what do you call it? Paybacks and all these kind of things, kickbacks, sorry, with regards to how the funds are deployed. And there's a lot of shady dealing with regards to how the funds are dispersed long term and even short term. And a lot of these issues that we see with regards to funds coming in to help and then 5, 10 years, you hear nothing about it. So it makes a lot of sense why they go the trust route, and specifically why they would make sure first of all, the application process itself was open to everyone again, because you don't want to lock it in to be some sort of neo-colonial entity, like some people like to say, with regards to having the funds come in. So it makes a lot of sense why they create the trust in that way. Why it would be a blind trust again, because you don't want it to be locked into the whims of the donors themselves, because there are a lot of issues with that we see with traditional aid mechanisms that we have, whether it's through the UN and some of these other channels. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense why they'll go through that route and why they'll prioritize ensuring that those that will come on board, first and foremost, have a shared philosophy and long-term ideology when it comes to how they see the promise of Bitcoin and where they actually can practically scale some of these solutions that we think would benefit the space long term. So definitely, those are kind of the major reasons that I would assume they took those two decisions. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense from that perspective. And again, it's our job now that we're on the board to ensure that we actualize some of these long-term goals and mission that we really have to grow the ecosystem. Again, at the end of the day, that's really what we're doing here. We're just growing out the ecosystem because there's already an existing talent pool. There's already existing
Mm.
um, reasons to hop onto these use cases that are uniquely within the Bitcoin context. And definitely merging those two together will be the only path forward to have a viable long-term solution to some of these problems we see, whether it's inflation or just inefficiencies and unsophisticated payment rails really that we have. So those are the major reasons, definitely, I think.
Interesting. So what would be the differences then between the work that you're doing through the B Trust and then the work you're doing through Recursive Capital? Because I know you're in both ways you're trying to grow adoption of Bitcoin. You have funds that you're trying to deploy. What are some of those similarities and differences look like?
Yeah, and I love that question definitely because this would help clarify some of the operational differences and structural differences between the two. So you think about it from the perspective of B Trust, like I said, we are specifically geared towards ensuring that the funding is going towards open source development first and foremost because we see that's where the majority of the value is from the perspective of building some of these solutions and infrastructure in general. Because again, if you're going the route of a decentralized open network, all of that kind of stuff, you can't be building closed systems and closed ecosystems. It's antithetical to the entire goal. So definitely moving some of those funds, the majority into open source really. So whether that's, initially funding developers themselves. So a lot of that could be grant style based funding. So that's kind of the majority of where the action will be happening with regards to Peace Trust and the disbursement of the funds. And with regards to the general target that we have of where these disbursements will go to, it's not going to be equity style funding, for example, which is the domain of VCs and some of these other funds that we see like Recursive. So that's one of the major differences between the two that you'd see. And again, some of those things are, while Recursive could be funding closed systems or closed source projects, Btrust is never going to be doing that. So you're not going to be seeing us funding closed systems. It's going to be entirely towards open source because again, we're prioritizing this resilience and we're building on this resilience. So we can't be going back and saying, hey, you know what, let's be funding these guys to be writing up shady code or closed code. So that's what, two of the major differences that you'd see. But with regards to similarity, like you said, we are both aligned when it comes to growing up the ecosystem. And just to, clarify to those listening, when it comes to the interplay between existing projects or companies that the board members are involved with and we trust, we're very, very careful with regards to, like I said, self-dealing. So, for example, I'm involved with, Qala, which you could argue could be something that B-Trust could fund, but from perspective of B-Trust, that wouldn't be something that we would fund, again, because there's a huge conflict of interest with regards to that, unless, maybe we drop out from our capacities with Qala and completely have nothing to do with the fund whatsoever. I mean, with the project whatsoever, then you could have that. But with regards to Recursive 2, you wouldn't be seeing, obviously, us, B-Trust specifically, funding projects that come out of Recursive Capital, because, I'll give some more background with regards to how that's possible. But yeah, in general, self-dealing, all that kind of stuff is definitely something that we're ensuring that isn't going to be possible with B-Trust, like I said, because we don't want to have wise guys take the position of the board members in the future and then try to take advantage of some of these loopholes, so to speak, and then game the system. So with regards to Recursive, so Recursive isn't just taking like a passive, just funding projects that will, grow the ecosystem. We're also taking an active role from a perspective of actually getting our hands dirty to building and being involved in the space. So things like, growing out, because we're thinking about it from this perspective. So there's Recursive Capital itself. We have Recursive Research already, and we're planning to expand to Recursive Labs itself. Now, the perspective of all of those two, would be like subsidiaries for Recursive Capital themselves. Specifically with Recursive Research, we're talking about all the general research that has to go with, that has to go into thinking about ways to innovate in this space, priorities to be thinking about in terms of projects we're funding. So general research with regards to all of that is going to be handled by Recursive Research, which is already an existing subsidiary of Recursive Capital. And then with regards to Recursive Lab itself, you know, um, just to give like a background, in I think 2021 was when I got the grant from the Human Rights Foundation. So specifically, that grant was towards wallet development. Now, I'm currently working on a wallet, so that wallet will be launched out of Recursive Labs itself because again, the primary aim of Recursive Labs is to ensure that not only are we helping with integration into the Bitcoin context, so actually integrating either on-chain or LM specifically, we will be helping companies, integrate that, and then obviously that will be in exchange for equity. So that could be the arrangement that will be going forth with regards to the interplay between what we're helping with the companies and then what we're getting in return instead of actually directly funding them with with capital themselves. So it will be this integration would be considered the capital that we're going into. So another thing is with regards to actually proving out the ecosystem. So initially, right now, helping to prove out this space because again, a lot of VCs aren't specifically investing in Bitcoin. So we are uniquely positioned to set kind of the pace as well as what the general long-term goals are or the missions are with regards to the ecosystem. So obviously part of that was trying to prove out the ecosystem. So hence the investment in BitNow, for example, which is a Bitcoin company. And seeing that investment grow, to quite considerable multiples and helping that with regards to showing investors that, hey, this space is actually growing. There's a lot of promise in the space. Might as well consider, investing in the space. So that helps with getting funds into Recursive because we're currently raising a, moderate $1 million fund as well for Recursive Capital. So that would help obviously prove out the space as well. So with regards to Recursive Labs in general, it would be pumping out these projects ourselves, with the wallet I'm working on, as well as helping companies integrate as well. Another thing is helping plug into the existing infrastructure that we're seeing to kind of streamline the process as well as help enhance that UX that we're seeing. So liquidity provision when it comes to, some of either the portfolio companies we have or in general with regards to Lightning, running channels and ensuring that we have enough liquidity going inbound and outbound and helping with even renting channel space, especially with some of these onboarding we're expecting to happen. So with regards to the general goal of Recursive, outside of just growing the ecosystem itself, or should I say within growing the ecosystem, we're kind of being cautious in projects we're funding. So with regards to what we consider a Bitcoin company, we're being very, very specific to ensure that it's not just companies that are making the majority of their revenue through Bitcoin, because that could apply to a range of companies that are really, shitcoin heavy. So we're very, very careful in terms of our definitions, companies we're looking at going into and investing in. So yeah, it's definitely to continue investing in these companies to ensure that we're also pumping out our own, projects here and there that we see tremendous value could be gained from in regards to the general ecosystem and as well as, helping build out the space really. Like I said, we aren't just trying to be passive investors, so to speak. We're trying to play an active role in the ecosystem because again, we're at early stages and the best way to really grow it out is to invest in these startups, get our hands dirty and really prove out the space because we're thinking long-term. Recursive is here to be a fund for the next 10, 20, 30 years, even, past probably a lifetime. So like I said, like a lot of the things in the space, that's really how we're thinking about it. That's the current state of Recursive, similarities between, Btrust and Recursive and the differences, especially, which I think are quite important for people to understand so they don't have mixed expectations with regards to what we're going to deliver with Recursive and Btrust. So yeah, end of rant,
I
I guess.
appreciate the context. That's helpful, for sure. Now, I want to get into Lightning specifically, and I want to understand what the constraints are from your perspective, whether it's at Recursive or at Btrust. Is it a constraint around education? Is it a constraint around capital? What are some of those factors that are limiting adoption and limiting actual usage today of the Lightning Network?
Yeah, there's quite a lot. Specifically, when we're talking about building, there aren't builders really in the space from the perspective of numbers really if we're looking at it. So that's a huge issue we're seeing. So there are existing companies that have heard about Bitcoin, have heard about Lightning, trying to integrate, but the issue is that they don't have engineers that are technically capable of doing that or handling or maintaining that integration that happens post integration. So like I said, a lot of the things that we're doing is with regards to ensuring that whether it's through our portfolio companies or even through Recursive Labs itself, that we're pumping out some of the existing, so we're pumping out new infrastructure to help with this issue. So like I said, BitNob ensuring that they have existing APIs, some of these, what do you call it, infrastructure, like the actual nodes that they run themselves, which they do. But that would help with kind of getting these companies onboarded and also giving them access to existing channels that are within the geography of the place that they're operating in, which is, Nigeria, for example. Another thing, obviously, is like you mentioned, education. It's a huge one. Now, we're not just talking about, how to use the Lightning Network. We're talking specifically about developer education, which is where Qala now comes into play again, because the primary issue we're having really is the lack of builders. I mean, even with large exchanges that are trying to integrate Bitcoin, I mean, trying to integrate Lightning, a huge issue that they come across is they don't have any existing developers either working for them or in the wider pool of developers that can handle, integrating Lightning and actually maintaining Lightning. Because again, Lightning isn't a it's not something that just, you integrate and then, switch on and it keeps going. You need to have someone maintaining all the liquidity. There are tools and services that are being used to help manage all of that. But again, even with those tools, they aren't at a stage where they could handle quite a lot of this large ontake of onboarding, really, which again ties into the lack of developers to begin with. So definitely the primary thing I think is definitely a lack of developers. But even with regards to Lightning as a whole and how it operates, obviously there are still some things that need to be worked on, without getting into the technicals of how the network works itself. So again, a lot of that could be assuaged, so to speak, with having more technical developers that can and have the knowledge to actually build on Lightning, maintain Lightning, integrate Lightning, and help really grow the adoption with regards to that. And then obviously with regards to education too, it helps to have um, the public be aware of actually how to use the Lightning Network, how some of these things work, not necessarily the technical things with regards to ACLCs and all of that, but how to properly use these services so they're not, shooting themselves in the foot or not using it properly and then causing even more problems than are trying to be fixed by these systems. So definitely education is both ways. And I see it being both ways, even, in general with regards to having tank capacity built into those, programs like Qala and all that, and then helping with the developers bring up themselves to figure they're technically capable of handling all these integrations, all that kind of stuff. And then people in the public actually having this proper understanding of, hey, what's a seed, what's a phrase, how do I secure my seed, all that kind of stuff, how do I use Bitcoin, how does Lightning work, what are some of the ways I could actually use these services? Because again, innovation only comes after education, really, because you first have to know what the thing is for you to be able to innovate. And a lot of what we're going to be seeing is some of these entrepreneurs in the space that might currently not be interested in Bitcoin or Lightning, actually learning more about it and actually coming up with ideas that even us in the space haven't thought of. So that's the huge part, with regards to even outside of Qala, even with regards to Recursive Lab as well, reaching out to some of these companies and getting a feel of what their idea is. Have they heard about Bitcoin? If they haven't, we help them with that. And then we see a stage where we're like, what do you think about this and all of that? And a lot of what we've been seeing is quite a lot of ideas, even when it comes to, the ethical loan space from companies that aren't necessarily Bitcoin companies. So yeah, there's a lot of things to do and build around, but definitely education plays a huge role and definitely the developer talent.
Yeah. Are there any particular applications you think will be well suited to Lightning? Anything that will, like, what will be Lightning's, what will be people's first entry point into Lightning? Will it be through, you mentioned loans, you mentioned DCA, you mentioned exchanges.
Yeah.
Will it be retail? Will it be remittances? Will it be online streaming payments? What do you think will be the first kind of main use case that people start using Lightning for?
So it's definitely going to be within the context of uh, remittance, definitely. If it's within the African sphere, so to speak, in Nigeria. Because if you think about it, like we mentioned, there are a lot of inefficiencies with regards to remittance in traditional systems. So the primary thing being is super costly. And what you end up having on the other end is a fraction of what you actually spend. So definitely a lot more people will be more aware of the possibilities of Lightning through remittance, definitely. And again, it'll be through some of the apps that are already existing that have integrated into Lightning, so things like BitNom. So it'll be trivial examples like, yourself, for example, let's say you have friends in Nigeria or people in that geography. It'll definitely be for you to load up either using Blue Wallet or Moon. And then you send them sats all the way directly, instantly, cheaply. I mean, that's the primary way you'll be seeing that. Another thing, obviously, is through things like virtual cards. A great company, which I often use quite a lot is, Pay with Moon. And I'm seeing a lot more adoption with regards to individuals seeing the value in not only paying for the virtual cards using the Lightning Network, but the seamlessness between that interaction, really. Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to deal with the traditional system, there are a few restrictions, not only with the amount you can pay, even though Moon has a $1,000 limit for obviously regulatory reasons. We're seeing a lot more people understand that, hey, I'd have to go through all these limits with my traditional account of getting this virtual card and then going onto this service and then it goes, hey, virtual cards from Nigeria don't work, or your account has been flagged because you're Nigerian. All those sort of discriminatory issues that we see with traditional systems, it's devoid in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So a lot of people have been using these virtual cards that are either through Bitrefill or through Pay with Moon. So we're going to see a lot more people explore the space throughout other avenues outside of just buying and selling or holding Bitcoin and using via Lightning. Another thing that's interesting, which shout out to the Lightning developers around the world working on this, which is gaming. Obviously, Africa is part of a large chunk of the gaming. The gaming industry really is. Africa plays a prominent role there. So a lot of the gamers, gamer friends as well that I have, a lot of them are exploring some of these games that are on the Lightning Network here. So games that allow you to actually, have like a prize pot that you get paid actual Bitcoin via the Lightning Network. So this is stuff that Zebedee is doing with Counter-Strike Go, I think is the game that they could play on. So a lot of them have been doing that lately. And from that perspective, it's like, hey, I play games all the time, and this is a fun way to actually monetize the gameplay that I'm having, which ordinarily you can't do. Obviously, there are plans to scale out with regards to the games that they are offering. So Zebedee planning to actually add games like Call of Duty, for example, which has a huge player base in Africa and Nigeria as well. I'm a Call of Duty player myself, so a lot of people are exploring these channels to gain access to the Lightning Network and seeing a lot of them use interesting ways really to gain access to Lightning or leverage Lightning in novel ways. So even from the perspective of, fixed float on some of these other services and how they use that between, getting money, let's say from their salary, and then finding ways to actually get paid in Bitcoin. So whether it's using Bitweight or some of these other services, just to ensure that number one, they're not holding their money in Naira again because inflation and some of these other issues. And number two, leveraging the Lightning Network to actually make these payments once they get into their account. So we're seeing a lot of this exploration happen. Definitely remittance is the first one. And we're seeing a lot of other digital products and services via, whether it's virtual cards. And then we're seeing some of that spur into gaming as well, again, because it is within the general digital point of view as well. So definitely we're seeing all of that, and that's kind of where the space is at. But we expect a lot more innovation to happen and a lot more adoption with regards to Lightning on the continent, definitely.
Right. Now, I want to get into one question on education, because this is something core to what you've been working on for the last few years.
Yeah.
Where do you think the Bitcoin community is doing a really good job in education, and where do you think the Bitcoin community could improve?
So I say where they're doing a great job is definitely with, products like Chaincode. I mean, Chaincode has arguably been the single, entity that's onboarded so many developers, whether it's getting them to actually work on some of these open source projects like Bitcoin Core itself, or actually going to working on companies that operate in that space. So that's definitely one thing. And the thing that they do well specifically is ensuring, again, is that it's all about signal to noise, really. So when you come into these programs, the primary thing that's made clear to you is we're not here to talk about Bitcoin and price swings and all that kind of stuff. It's specifically about how you could build on this network. What the hell is this network? How does it work? The philosophies that underlie this whole movement, because at the end of the day, Bitcoin really is a movement, a financial freedom movement, really, from my perspective. So the thing they do great about kind of education really is to ensure that individuals have their priorities straight from day one. So you're not going to see developers working in the Bitcoin space trying to just make a quick buck, for example. Whereas in other, projects, you tend to see a lot of people just trying to make money quickly and trying to get out and really grow their wealth from some of these really, unfortunate methods and means. So that's one thing we're doing really well, when I say we, I mean, through Qala, for example. And another thing I think we could definitely improve on is, this is something I've already started doing and advised others, I guess. And spoken to others as well to do so, is to leverage the existing infrastructure we have for education around the continent itself. So if you're trying to erect the like Bitcoin ecosystems or yeah, Bitcoin ecosystems really in general. The issue obviously you face is you have to start from scratch, which isn't ideal, obviously. You're not going to have, if you're trying to build out these ecosystems, you're not going to expect, 1,000 developers to turn up to your first Bitcoin meetup. Probably like two, three people. So there are a lot of issues with regards to getting these programs up and running. Now, if you think about it, if you're trying to get it up to speed, all you have to do really is tap into the existing infrastructure. So what do I mean by that? We already have hubs and skills acquisition centers that already train developers to either do stuff like graphic design, digital marketing, all that kind of stuff. So all you have to do is go, hey, you know what, Trojan horse some of this Bitcoin material into these programs and go, you know, here's some beginner intro material about Bitcoin. Whoever's interested, they could have access to more material, through other programs that are outside of that, which you can be holding yourself. So what you'd be doing is, if I have like a local community hub that I have, that is teaching them about tech in general, I go there and talk to them and see how open they are to this idea to begin with, obviously because you need their approval to be pushing this sort of material. So once you get there, you're kind of building out this beginner pipeline, which is very, very key and critical. I mean, you can't have Bitcoin developers that you just spring into existence. So what you need to do is build out some of these grassroots developers. So as soon as you have this beginner material ready for them, by the time they're done, combining that with, let's say, learning JavaScript and all of that, they're probably at that mid to senior level stage. So they could go out to, projects and programs like Qala or even others that would be springing up and we expect to be springing up. And then they could handle the next stage. So you see, all you need to do is really build out that critical infrastructure towards the tail end. Now, alternatively, you could also be doing in between. So between them being zero, not knowing how to code and all of that, all the way to getting to that mid-level. So you could be taking advantage of that. So it could be, these hubs treat them with the basics, and when they get to that stage, it could be your own project. So you'll be teaching them specifically how to work with JavaScript or Rust in the Bitcoin context. So they'll be learning more protocol level stuff and how to integrate it. And then after that, they could move on to other projects that are more advanced like Qala. So I think what we could definitely be doing more of is take advantage of existing structures that we have already, because kind of just like bootstrapping the entire process. And by the time we're done with that, what we think would happen or what we hope would happen is you have a thriving pipeline all throughout the stage. So from beginners that don't know anything about Bitcoin all the way to individuals that are getting jobs, via projects like Qala, for example. So we see, if you really want to build out this entire viable pipeline, you definitely have to key into existing structures, which, for example, Recursive Capital did with the Catch Step Singularity, which is a program that is kind of like YC styled. So they're going to be teaching three tracks, the business dev guys, developers, as well as what they call hustlers. So these aren't people that are not that technical, but at the same time, they have the grit and drive to actually bring these developers and the biz dev guys to actually create companies. So what we did with them was partner and actually put in Bitcoin material for all these three tracks. Now, the hope and promise is individuals that go through this sort of program will come out going, hey, that Bitcoin is really, really interesting. And then they now sort after, some more intermediary to expert level material of Bitcoin. And then now you can see we're building out this proper pipeline. So really, I think we should definitely focus on trying to key into this sort of ecosystem building from the ground up, definitely. I think once we do that, everything will fall into place nicely.
Interesting. Okay, I got one final question for you. Is there a particular technology or use case, or maybe it's a protocol built on Bitcoin or Lightning, that you're most excited about as you look forward the next couple of years? Maybe it could be something that the rest of the community is overlooking. I'd love to know what's piquing your interest right now.
I mean, there are quite a lot of things going on in this space, like U3XO, and trying to shorten down the footprint of the UTXO set itself. There are other projects too, like, Sapio language, I think, done by Rubio or something, I can't remember the name. But that specific project is with regards to getting a smart contracting system on top of Bitcoin, really, a language, really, not a system, on top of Bitcoin, which could be interesting for the developers that we've been talking to. And we see in the space that go, hey, I want to build on Bitcoin, but, I want to do smart contracting and all of that. And I'm going to be writing Bitcoin script directly or some of these other avenues. So there are projects like that. And then with regards to the general projects in the space, outside of even Bitcoin governance, I definitely think, the next step when it comes to the general upgrade that we'll see with regards to Bitcoin Core will probably be the integration of, what do you call it, any priv output. So that one is going to be the operation code that will help transition the Lightning Network from the current penalty mechanism to, L2, which is a mechanism that is devoid of this penalty mechanism that will make it a lot easier to use the Lightning Network because, again, right now, the network technically punishes you for forgetting, which is a huge issue with Lightning. So when I say forgetting, I mean channel state. So if you come in with bad state and you try to publish that transaction, or should I say publish unchained, sorry, then your counterparty can definitely sweep out the entire channel, which is something you definitely want from a counterparty perspective. I mean, it's not like you're trying to cheat, but you still get that punishment nonetheless because the system is kind of agnostic from that point of view. So it'll definitely be to see how we'll be able to transition into L2, really. And I think that would definitely be the next challenge if, Bitcoin governance doesn't take, priority over getting that operation code going. But definitely, there are a few others, but I say the primary one I'm really, really excited towards is definitely moving towards L2 and getting, PTLCs going. I mean, there are a few challenges with that. I won't get into that, but there's definitely interesting angles through that. So yeah, it's definitely to see the transition between the two and getting those operation codes that we need in Bitcoin Core to be able to actually create these systems. So that's really what my what the next steps are for me in terms of excitement.
Love it. Where can people go to find out more about you and the work you're doing at Recursive?
Ooh, Twitter, I say the easiest, I guess. So I go on to Twitter. My tag is I hate 1999.
Awesome. And Recursive, your site is what's the domain?
It's rcrsv.xyz.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned so much,
Yeah,
and
likewise.
I can't wait to. I hope we can do this again soon. I hope we can
Yeah,
do
definitely.
another update as you guys roll out the B Trust and as your work at Recursive continues, because I think there's a lot of cool work being done in Africa, and I don't think it gets enough light. And I
Definitely.
want to make sure to share some of these stories going on. Yeah, wishing you all the best.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me and thanks for highlighting this part of development in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Definitely, like you mentioned, Africa is a lot is happening and I definitely advise people to keep an eye out on Africa. If you're an investor and you're looking to explore the space, hit up Recursive Capital, contact at rcrsv.xyz. Our email is open. You can definitely reach out. If you're on Twitter, you could definitely just DM, I suppose, if you're really that interested in the space as well. So yeah, really exciting times and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the time. Welcome to the Lightning Round presented by Voltage. Voltage is the industry-leading provider of Bitcoin and Lightning node infrastructure. In fact, many of your favorite apps and services already use Voltage to scale their business quickly and easily without maintenance. Voltage also offers an inbound liquidity product called Flow, which helps you as a node operator get inbound liquidity easily. Overall, Voltage is creating the industry standard suite of non-custodial products, helping brands, engineers, and startups scale. To learn more about Voltage, visit voltage.cloud. Let's get right into it. It's been about 20 hours since I posted the last episode. Haven't had much time for you guys to send in sats or comments, but we did get a few. Permaculture sent in 300 sats for episode 30 with Brian Solston. J24 sent in 100 sats for episode 28 with the Albi guys. And Peter is currently streaming sats right now for the episode with Brian Solston. Thank you guys for sending in sats. And just a quick mention here, I'm going to be offline for a few days, so all the comments and questions that you guys send in here, I'm still going to see them. I'm still going to read through them on episode 33, but I will not be reading them on episode 32. I'm going to record an intro and outro to that episode right now, so I will not get a chance to answer those on episode 32, but you will see them answered for you on the following episode, which will be episode 33. Can't wait to read them and talk to you guys soon.